Welcome back, everybody, to another lesson. We're going from zero to producer in 90 days with Ableton Live. I'm your instructor, Torbjorn. First, a big thanks to Ableton for extending that free trial of Live 10 Suite for up to 90 days. While we're all in quarantine, we get to stay productive with our time and make some art. Last video we were doing together was all about making glitchy sounds. We were learning how to make glitchy sounds match the key of our song, or we were learning how to make glitchy sounds match the tempo of our song. And then we did one of my favorite tricks at the end, which is you put 20 OTT audio effects on something and really glitch it out and get some cool textural glitches that are kind of weird, but they can be kind of cool too. Today we're going to dive into an Ableton instrument called Wavetable. Wavetable is a type of synthesis. Typically, we're relying with any type of synthesizer. We're typically relying on oscillators to generate a sound, and we're using a filter, envelopes, and LFOs to modulate that sound so that it changes over time. Oscillators commonly generate a sine wave or a triangle wave or a sawtooth or a square wave, and then that wave repeats over and over and over. Let's look at that through an oscilloscope. An oscilloscope is something that just shows you the shape of a wave. So I'm just going to play low C here through a sine wave oscillator on this Wavetable synthesizer. You can see that it's a nice round curve. It repeats over and over. If we were to play it an octave higher, then it's the same shape, but it just plays twice as fast, or there's twice as many cycles in the same amount of time. And if we look down here at our spectrum analyzer, you can see around 129 hertz. That's that first peak of a sine wave. And when we put it up an octave, 263, pretty much you just double the number, and that's how you get something an octave higher. Because it's a sine wave, it just has one fundamental frequency and there's no harmonics. But as we change that to, let's say, a triangle wave, you can see that we start to get this added harmonic here, a fifth, an octave and a fifth, in fact, above our root. We get another harmonic here at an E, another one up here at an A sharp, so on and so forth. And as we're changing our wave shape, you can see too that we get on our oscillator that triangle has that very sharp peak up at the top. That roundness is now gone. If we put this at a sawtooth and took a look at that, way buzzier, you can see we get way more harmonics. And on our oscilloscope, you can see we get that really sharp edge on the sawtooth wave. And if we put this all the way up at the top to a square wave, very squared off, very buzzy, lots and lots of harmonics. So that's kind of what's happening with those different waves. Normally we're choosing one of those waves and it repeats over and over, but Wavetable synthesizers uniquely allow us to change that shape fluidly over time. So we can morph between a bunch of different shapes. I could play this note and start to shift the wavetable here from a sine wave up to a square and back. If we put that an octave lower, I think you and hear the sub frequency, you get an even more exaggerated effect that you can hear. If you're listening on small headphones, small speakers, laptop, or a phone, you probably won't hear this at all. But as we start adding those harmonics, you can start to hear it on smaller speakers. And the really interesting thing that you've probably noticed is that it's not all of the same harmonics. A triangle wave, for example, has harmonics that show up like this. Just a few, and they're in relation to the fifth of the root note. So a C at 64 hertz and a G at 197, those have a musical relation in terms of our scale and key. So it's some of those same numbers and same patterns that make our chords sound musical and natural are also occurring with our wavetables. So the things that make up this synthesizer is it's got 2 wavetable oscillators, so we can switch between oscillator 1 and 2 and turn it on with the button here. We also have a sub oscillator. Sub oscillator basically just lets us switch between a sine wave, and as we turn this tone up, turns it into like a pseudo square wave. It's still kind of a little sawtoothy. It's not completely flat, but really, really buzzy. And we can switch between different octaves of our sub oscillator as well, which can be really super useful when we're adding that clean sub underneath a more complex sound. And we'll look at that in just a second. We've got 2 filters here. You can turn them on and off. We've got different types of filtering, so you can run them in series, parallel, or you can split them. And split is really cool because it makes the first filter only work with oscillator 1, and it makes the second filter only work with oscillator 2. We'll look at those different modes in a second. That gives us a lot of really cool options to customize our sounds. We also are different modulation sources. We get an amplitude envelope. We get 2 extra custom envelopes. We get 2 LFOs. And then we get this matrix section that ties it all together. Seems like a lot of buttons, but it's actually just a lot of different iterations of the same thing. So in a lot of the sounds that we're going to be making, we're just using one envelope or we're just using one LFO. And because we have this matrix thing, you can attach a single envelope shape to multiple different parameters. So here's my top 3 tips. I've got 3 sounds here that I pre-made that I think are super useful. I use Wavetable to make chords. I use Wavetable to make leads. I use Wavetable to make bass sounds. I love using the LFOs as well because they've got all these different shapes built in, including this random shape, which I'll show you guys in just a second. But I want to do my Food Network moment here, and I want to go through and play you a couple different sounds. So the first one that I make a lot is this future bass style swell chords. And those chords sound like this. Really easy. Let's hear it with a single note. So you can see we've got a lot of different movement happening here. So let me break down what's happening. Really, I took this sustain all the way down on the amplitude so that it's just a very short sound. It starts making sound and then it disappears all within about 1.5 seconds. And all of the magic is happening here on envelope 2. 125 milliseconds of attack, 450 milliseconds of decay. And I went here into the matrix and I clicked on different parameters, the position of oscillator 1, the filter frequency of filter 1, and the unison over here on the global section. And I just turned some of those up. So as this shape moves, we're getting movement on those 3 parameters, the oscillator position, the filter frequency, and the unison. Let's take a listen to that synth one more time. You can see that that position of that wavetable is moving quite a bit. Over time, that filter is opening up and closing again. And then this unison, which is like multiple notes playing at the same time, slightly detuned in pitch from each other. That's causing the width, how much they're detuned by, to increase and decrease. And because they're all being moved by this envelope 2 together, that's how it feels like such a cohesive sound. So let's listen to that in context with some drums and bass and to see how that might work in like a future bass or a future house type track. And of course, with all house music comes that classic sidechain. So I just added this percussion loop, a kick drum on its own track, and a sub layer. The sub layer is just playing the same note. But when this kick plays, it is causing our sub and our chords to duck in volume. Pretty classic move for a house track. All right, let's look at tip number 2, how to make a wobble 808 hybrid sound. So this is the type of thing that I hear a lot in like UK garage and sometimes in some left field bass and some deep dubstep, anything where you want that kind of wonky, whompy wobble sound, like in a dubstep track. But what usually happens in those sounds is that it goes wah, opens and yo, and closes, and then the sound stops. So this is a hybrid with that type of sound mixed with the 808, so we get this sustaining bass after that womp opens and closes. Here's what the sound sounds like. All right, a lot of cool movement happening there. So let's break it down. Amplitude, I just opened that puppy wide up, sustain all the way up to the top, little bit of attack, 11 milliseconds. All I'm really using that attack for is just to help get rid of some of that clicking and popping sound, which sometimes happens in these more elaborate bass sounds. Over here on envelope 2, again, that's where a lot of the magic is happening. I made our usual shark fin shape. This is something that we've done in a couple different synthesizer videos, but the trick is that instead of taking the sustain all the way down to 0, I left it at 20%, and that's how we're allowing some of that bass to continue to sustain through. Go over here to the matrix, and you can see that the position of oscillator 1, the FM amount, the oscillator 1 gain, the filter 1 frequency, and the subtone is done with the LFO. So let's press pause on the subtone and continue. All of these things, filter frequency, oscillator gain, FM, and position, are being modulated by envelope 2. Here's what it sounds like. Couple different notes. So where the FM thing, this is something that I'd like to explain. Down here in your oscillator, typically this is set to none. These are just additional ways that you can change your wavetables and customize the shape of them. Frequency modulation, we remember that sound from our video where we were using the sampler instrument. Familiar with that sound when we were making dubstep wobble basses? Well, it's built into Wavetable as well. All I did was turn it to FM, messed around with the tune. I ended up taking the tuning all the way down to -100, the amount up to +100, and then I modulated that with that envelope. So this is the first sound where we are using an LFO. I kept it super simple, sine wave. Over here by default, the rate is in hertz, but if you click this note button, you can sync the BPM of your LFO to the BPM of your song. And I just put it at a half note value, and then I made that modulate the subtone. So instead of just getting a single sustained bass note, we're getting some movement with that tone. So you get that kind of additional wobble. And then all that big, like aggressive, nasally bass sound, that's all coming from the envelope 2 modulating these parameters of our oscillator 1. You'll notice here that this is a different shape than the one that we had on our last sound. All you got to do is hit this menu and you can go down here and choose all kinds of different wavetable shapes. I ended up going with the sub 1 shape for this one. All right, so let's throw a breakbeat over that, some kind of UK garage-ish or UK breakbeat style thing, and let's hear that bass sound in context. All right. Tip number 3. All about the glitchy sounds. You know that I love those glitchy sounds. So on this one, I wanted to look at this random LFO shape. This is really interesting. This is a trick that my friend Isaac, aka Subaqueous, showed me. It's a trick where instead of using the random to just move the modulation around randomly, you can set the rate of the random all the way down to as low as it goes, so it will not really move. But because it has that random algorithm, every time you trigger a new note, it's going to move whatever it's modulating into a random place, which is a really cool thing. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to hit just the same note a bunch of different times and look at all of the things that it's modulating. You can see our filters move around all over the place. Our wavetables move all over the place. And because all you have to do is hit a new note to trigger a new random position with that LFO, I thought it would be really cool to put it through an arpeggiator, something that automatically triggers lots of different notes. So diving into what is being modulated here, we're using both of the LFOs with the exact same settings. They're set to random and the rate is set all the way down to 0. And we've got two different oscillators. One is on this Galactica category and another one is on this Pulse Dual category. And I set both of the wavetable positions to 50% and then modulated them each respectively by LFO 1 and 2. Did the same thing here with the EQs. I hit this little submenu and hit split, and that is making each one of these EQs only affect oscillator 1 and EQ number 2. Filter number 1 is only affecting oscillator 1. Filter 2 is only affecting oscillator 2. And because they are different LFOs, both set to random, they're going to all trigger at all different odd random things every time we have a new note. Hopefully that all made sense. Maybe it just makes more sense to hear the sound. So let's press play on this arpeggiated chord progression. So you can imagine that this is a pretty tame randomization. But you can imagine that if we were like doing a mud pie with this and you were truly creating all kinds of different random things, that you could probably just like trick out your whole matrix here with all these different random LFO 1 and 2s and just press record with a resample track going and grab some different little pieces for a mud pie. I might make a whole another video on that. Well, oscillator 1 position, filter 1 frequency, oscillator 2 position, and filter 2 frequency, and the amplitude delay. The amplitude decay, making this a very plucky sound. Those are all moving all over random at all times. I'm not really quite sure what genre of music this would be, but this is like a dubstep type beat, but with this more future bassy type art. So with a sub underneath, let's hear it in context and hear what this type of beat could sound like with this sound. Kind of like it with the reverb on as well. Maybe a little bit of delay could be cool. So as you can see with these 3 quick examples, lots of different things that you can control and modulate with very few oscillators, very few filters, and very few envelopes and LFOs. The matrix gives you so much power with the Wavetable synthesizer. Last but not least, I just wanted to talk about all of the different wavetables. Filters and LFOs are nothing too unfamiliar to us here at this point, but really what makes Wavetable unique is the actual wavetables. So we were just looking at all of the stuff in the basic menu, Galactica, FM, beating, saw, sub, all of these different things. But outside of the basic menu, we've got all kinds of different stuff. Collection, complex, distortion, filter, formant, etc., all the way down here to user. And user kind of makes this unique thing happen where we can create our own wavetables. We can just go in here and I'm going to just grab a random sample. I don't know what this is going to be. Here, let's grab this ARP poly lead. We're just going to drag it here where it says drop sample here. And you can see that we get our own custom wavetable. Actually, I should have done this with this one here. So this was like a sampled synthesizer sound, and I dropped it into our Wavetable synthesizer. So even without any movement, already pretty interesting sounding wave. Definitely a unique shape here. And so if we went into our matrix and we used an LFO to modulate this, let's put it to 50% on our wavetable position so it can move up and down. Let me set this to 50. That's just one quick example. You can imagine that there quickly becomes like unlimited different wavetables once we start making custom ones. Really, really powerful synthesizer. Really easy to use if you can wrap your head around this matrix. Basically, we're using the same envelopes and LFOs for multiple destinations. When we use the same envelopes and LFOs for multiple destinations, it'll help that sound feel cohesive. We can combine positive and negative matrix values for different results. So while this LFO might be modulating the oscillator position with positive 50, we might take it and make it negative 50 here on our filter. So they're moving in tandem, but they're moving in the opposite direction. Still makes it cohesive, still using one modulator for multiple destinations. And the other thing is pretty much anything that you click on is going to show up in the matrix and you can start modulating it. So we can get really crazy really quickly with all of our different effects, volume, FM, sync, all kinds of stuff. I just pressed a couple random buttons there and started twisting stuff, and you can see that it got interesting really quickly. That's the top tips for Wavetable. Hopefully this will get you up and running quickly. Try lots of different things and experiment. If anything gets weird, you've always got Command-Z or Control-Z as an undo button because we're working on computers. There should be no fear for messing anything up. Sometimes it's those happy accidents that helps you develop a cool new sound. Thanks again to Ableton for extending that trial to 90 days. Thanks again to you for watching another video. Hope you make lots of beats and stay productive and stay creative, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.